The generation raised on participation trophies and you can be anything you want, grew up, had kids, and somehow became the most criticized parents in modern American history. Make it make sense. And honestly, that contradiction tells you everything you need to understand about millennial parents. If you grew up in the 80s or 90s, you probably remember a very specific kind of childhood optimism. Participation trophies, pizza parties for the whole class, a cultural atmosphere that told you your feelings mattered, your dreams were valid, and that the future was wide open. And then you graduated into the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. That collision between the promise of what life was supposed to be and the reality of what it actually turned out to be is the defining psychological tension of the millennial generation. And it shapes everything about how millennial parents show up for their kids now. Here's something worth sitting with. Millennials are the most educated generation in American history. According to the Pew Research Center, around 39% of millennials hold a bachelor's degree or higher, compared to 29% of Gen X at the same age. They did exactly what they were told. They went to school, took out the loans, followed the rules, and then they entered a job market that handed them a fraction of the economic stability those credentials were supposed to guarantee. Student loan debt in the U.S. crossed $1.7 trillion, and a massive chunk of that belongs to millennials, who are now simultaneously paying off their own education while trying to figure out how to afford their kids' futures. So when you see a millennial parent anxiously researching the best school district, or meticulously tracking their child's developmental milestones against every pediatric checklist available on the internet, understand what's actually going on underneath that behavior. They're not neurotic for no reason. They're responding rationally to a world that already showed them once that doing everything right doesn't necessarily mean things turn out the way they're supposed to. And here's my opinion, which I'm going to state plainly. Millennial parents are the most misunderstood generation of parents we've ever seen. They get mocked for over-researching everything, for wanting to validate their kids' emotions, for setting boundaries on screen time while being glued to their own phones. The cultural narrative around them is almost entirely condescending. They're either coddling their children, or projecting their anxieties onto them, or making parenting into a competitive performance for social media. And some of that criticism has a sliver of truth to it. But the vast majority of it completely misses the context that explains why they parent the way they do. When you understand what millennials actually lived through, not the stereotypes, but the actual economic and social conditions of their formative years, their parenting choices don't look like neurosis. They look like a deeply rational and emotionally intelligent response to genuine instability. That distinction matters, and not enough people are making it. Let's back up. There's a psychologist named Jean Twenge who has spent years studying generational personality differences, and what her research consistently shows is that each generation's characteristics are largely shaped by the social and economic environment they grew up in, not by some inherent personality flaw baked into the cohort. Millennials were raised in a cultural moment of intense optimism followed by a systemic crash. They were told they were special, and then they weren't treated that way by any of the institutions that were supposed to reward their effort. That experience doesn't produce arrogance. It produces anxiety. It produces hypervigilance. And when those people become millennial parents, it produces a very specific style of parenting that looks excessive from the outside, but makes complete sense from the inside. Now let's talk about what that actually looks like in practice. Developmental psychologists talk about something called scaffolding. It's the idea that the best kind of support you can give a child is the kind that's present when it's needed and steps back when it isn't. You build the framework around them while they're learning. You don't do the work for them, but you also don't leave them without structure. Millennial parents, in a lot of cases, have intuitively gravitated toward this approach, even if they don't know the academic term for it. They're not trying to eliminate difficulty from their kids' lives. They're trying to make sure that when difficulty shows up, their kids have a solid enough emotional foundation to handle it. The distinction between protecting a child from struggle and preparing a child for struggle is one that millennial parents tend to think about a lot, more consciously perhaps than any generation before them. And that consciousness comes from their own experience of feeling unprepared, not necessarily emotionally, but economically and institutionally, for what adulthood actually looked like. There's also something important happening with mental health. Millennials are the first generation to grow up alongside a real, mainstream public conversation about therapy, anxiety, and emotional well-being. They've normalized seeking help in a way their Gen X predecessors and boomer parents largely didn't. And they're carrying that into how they talk to their kids. When a millennial parent sits down to ask their 7-year-old how they're feeling about something and actually waits for a real answer, that's not coddling. That's generational progress. That's a parent choosing to give their child something they may not have fully received themselves. The experience of being genuinely heard. This is where the emotional intelligence piece becomes really significant. Research from the American Psychological Association has repeatedly shown that children who grow up with emotionally responsive parents tend to develop better self-regulation, stronger social skills, and more resilience over time, not less. The idea that teaching kids to name and process their emotions makes them fragile is not supported by developmental science. It's a cultural assumption, not an evidence-based one. And millennial parents, perhaps because they're the most research-obsessed generation of parents we've ever had, are often more aware of that gap between popular belief and actual data. Of course, there are real tensions in how all of this plays out, because millennial parents are also the first generation raising children in a world where social media has made parenting itself into a public performance. The pressure isn't just to be a good parent. It's to visibly appear to be a good parent in real time to an audience of peers who are all doing the same thing simultaneously. That dynamic creates an anxiety layer on top of all the other anxiety layers that were already there, and it produces some genuinely strange behavior. The manicured family Instagram account, the performative outdoor play sessions, the extremely curated birthday party aesthetic. That is very easy to mock and somewhat deserving of critique. But here's what that critique tends to miss. Most millennial parents are deeply uncomfortable with that performance themselves. There's a reason the phrase Instagram versus reality resonates so strongly with this generation. They know the gap between what they post and what their actual Tuesday afternoon looks like. They're not oblivious to the performance. They're trapped in it, often despite their better instincts, by a platform architecture specifically designed to reward the performance of an idealized life. And millennial parents are doing all of this while being financially squeezed in ways that are genuinely unprecedented for a middle-class generation in America. The cost of housing, healthcare, and childcare has risen dramatically faster than wages over the past 30 years. Millennials are the first generation in modern American history expected to be less financially stable than their parents. They're raising children while carrying debt, navigating a gig economy that offers less stability than previous generations experienced, and doing it all without the same social safety nets their parents could rely on. The anxiety you observe in millennial parenting is not irrational. It is a direct and proportionate response to a genuinely unstable environment. This also shapes how they think about their kids' futures in ways that look overcautious to older observers. When a millennial parent pushes hard to expose their kid to multiple languages or coding or emotional vocabulary or financial literacy, they're not trying to manufacture a prodigy. They're trying to hedge against a future they can't fully predict, using every tool they have available. Because they already know from lived experience that the path they were told to follow didn't necessarily lead where it was supposed to. So they're trying to give their kids as many paths as possible. What makes millennial parents genuinely distinct, though, is the combination of all of this. The emotional availability they're consciously trying to build, the educational intentionality, the economic anxiety, the awareness of mental health, all layered on top of one defining characteristic. They think about parenting more self-reflexively than any generation in history. They read the studies. They listen to the podcasts. They question their own assumptions in real time. They talk openly with their partners and their friends about what they're trying to do and whether it's working. That level of metacognitive engagement with parenthood is completely new. Is it always productive? No. Sometimes it spirals into a kind of paralysis by analysis that Gen X parents find exhausting to watch and Boomer grandparents find completely incomprehensible. But the impulse behind it, the desire to parent intentionally rather than just reflexively replicating what was done to them, is something worth taking seriously instead of dismissing. Because what millennial parents are fundamentally trying to do is break specific cycles while keeping the things that actually worked. They don't want to replicate the emotional unavailability that many of them experienced, even from well-meaning parents who were simply operating with the tools and assumptions of their own era. But millennial parents also don't want to raise children who collapse under pressure, who can't tolerate discomfort, who have no sense of delayed gratification or internal motivation. Millennial parents are threading a needle in real time with more information, more pressure, more public scrutiny, and less economic stability than any parenting generation before them. And the outcome of that threading won't be fully visible for another 20 years, when the kids being raised right now start telling us what they actually needed and what they wished had been different. So the next time you see a millennial parent spiral slightly while trying to decide which preschool curriculum is most aligned with their child's emerging learning style, maybe hold off on the eye roll. They're not performing anxiety for attention. They're doing the best they can with the information they have in a world that keeps moving the goalposts. And if you look closely enough, underneath all the research and the self-questioning and the occasional performative Instagram post, you'll find someone who just really desperately wants to get this right. After everything their generation went through, honestly, you can understand why. Anyway, if this resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to support these deep dives, hit that join button to become a channel member.